Music is powerful. Yes, it can move us emotionally and bring us together, but it's more than just music. Music, or more specifically sound, is a part of the same frequency spectrum that's also found in the colors of the rainbow, as well as the entire electromagnetic spectrum as a whole, and therefore it's no different from the technology behind our phones, remote controls, ultrasounds, or microwaves. What sets music aside, though, is that it's a language that we can decipher and use, a language that is at the basis of everything that we did not create and that has existed since the dawn of time. Other interesting facts about sound that are rarely acknowledged in the day-to-day is that it's essentially sonic geometry, and it's also capable of moving objects. The language of music is based on frequencies, or divisions in the spectrum, which are composed of the harmonic series, or a series of notes that ring off the initial pitch by dividing it in fractions of itself. Since the divisions are the same, it doesn't matter what note you play. The harmonic series always gives off the same notes in the scale. In fact, it consists of all the notes as it splits the spectrum into infinity. The spectrum literally fills itself back in, but not before this process releases a bunch of information. Not only does the harmonic series tell your ear whether the note is high or low, what instrument played it, or what kind of room it was played in, but it's also synonymous with equal-sided shapes. Not just because it makes even-spaced notes on a string, but if you tune A to 432 and then play an F sharp at 180 Hz, the harmonic series that rings off of it is almost verbatim the inner degrees of even-sided shapes, which makes sense of this phenomenon demonstrated in an experiment done at Clemson University, where they suspended a drop of water using sound and then ran it through the harmonic series. Now, the musical language is composed of single notes, but also structures such as chords and scales, which are built by combining different notes. The question is, where do these structures come from, and why are they universally agreed upon? I'll give you some suggestions in a minute, but funny enough, I think these structures are actually the Fibonacci sequence playing out. You see, with the Fibonacci sequence, in order to get the next number, you add the one you're on to the previous number you just came from, which means the number you're on is a product of all the other previous numbers combined. The smaller structures form together to make the larger structures, and this is exactly how the structures in music form and fit together. If you consider each note to be equal because, well, they are, then in theory each note could represent one, regardless of what note it is. And when we build structures, this means that those notes are interchangeable too, just as long as there's the same space between those notes. For instance, a power chord is a root in the fifth, which could be C and G, but also D to A, or E flat to B flat. Considering that, here's how the musical structures form and fit together in the Fibonacci sequence. 1 plus 1 equals a power chord plus 1 equals a triad plus a power chord equals the pentatonic scale, the pentatonic scale plus a power chord plus 1 equals the major scale, and the major scale plus the pentatonic scale equals the chromatic scale. How is it the Fibonacci sequence is found all over the place, including music, and nobody knows why? In nature, several hypotheses can arise to explain the same thing, but in music, the only culprit to point the finger at is the harmonic series. Could the harmonic series be a code that physically forces this universal order? I mean, literally everything is in motion from atoms to the stars, and therefore composed of a frequency. We've already seen how sound can manipulate and move matter, so maybe it's not so far-fetched. Well, if you examine the first 10 harmonics, the first 2 or 3 immediately define the perfect fifth in the scale, which happens to not only be the least distant interval there is, but also the 2/3 golden ratio split of the whole that's found all throughout nature. Then, if you examine harmonics 3 through 6, you get a perfect dominant 7th chord. Now, for those of you who aren't musically inclined, we get chords by layering every other note from the major scale on top of each other, and when we do this, you get a couple different types of chords which all serve a different function. The only time you get a dominant 7th chord is off the 5th scale degree, and its whole purpose is to resolve back down to the 1 chord a fifth away, or in other words, the same distance that the first 3 harmonics describe. However, music is a circle, so the measurements can imply either above the note you're on, like harmonics 1 through 3 suggests, or below, like this particular dominant 7th chord wants to resolve. But spoiler alert, we'll get to go the other way around the circle anyways. Speaking of circles, if you want to continue to move a fifth away, you would eventually go around the circle until you ended up where you started. This is what's known as the circle of fifths, and it also defines the 12 tones we use in Western music. And if you know what notes are in each structure, you'll also notice that if you take any 5 adjacent notes, you'll get an out-of-order pentatonic scale, or any 7 adjacent notes, and you'll get an out-of-order major scale. When you build a major scale off of each note in the circle of fifths, the scale above or below the one you're on basically contains the same notes except for one slight change, which happens to be the same note to and from the next scale every time. This is how we normally order major scales anyway, because, well, that's how they already order themselves. Anyways, so what if you wanted to go around the circle of fifths in a clockwise motion? Well, harmonics 7 through 10 give you the rest of the material you need to make an augmented 2 chord, which forces motion a fifth above, as the first 3 harmonics suggest. Now, there are some redundant notes as well as some that are shared by both dominant 7th chords within these first 10 harmonics, but I believe that's the beauty of this system. Never any waste. It's a code on how to order into the circle of fifths while still staying on point for the shorthand for even-sided shapes, and even then, still manages to tell you everything you want to know about what and where that note was made. Multiple functions without any extra conflicting or useless information. The epitome of efficiency. After the first 10 harmonics, the code begins to fill itself in chromatically, thereby finishing anything else it would be trying to say besides describing how that note was made and equal-sided shapes. Seems to me that the Harmonic Series is at the very least hinting at this universal ordering. Now, when it comes to frequencies, what you're dealing with is twofold. You have the seemingly linear path of frequencies, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc., which is actually a circle that folds in on itself at a 2-to-1 ratio. And then the other half is the spectrum then reorders itself by moving everything towards the least dissonant interval. And since there can't be a least dissonant interval without having other more dissonant intervals, then you guessed it, there's another spectrum of dissonance superimposed on top of the frequency spectrum, which does not follow the same linear path around the circle, but rather a phi shortcut through it. These frequencies, or wavelengths, that get shorter as the pitch or intensity gets higher and wider as the pitch gets lower, in conjunction with the dissonance spectrum that arises when we combine these frequencies together, gives us everything we need to work with in order to create the language of music, but actually it produces more than that. This ordering of frequencies seems to be describing the classic funnel shape found in draining sinks and tornadoes that's normally attributed to the Coriolis effect, but is also found elsewhere. You see, this funnel is simply the engine that drives the torus energy field, which is found in such obvious places such as hurricanes and galaxies, but also less obvious places such as the core of fruit. Frequency always orders itself using the torus method of organization and displacement. It's a physical manifestation of the circle of fifths, and it's also found in electricity in the form of magnetism. Magnetism is simply the linear spectrum of electrical current reordered into the magnetic circle of fifths, and it's why anything with electricity flowing through it has a magnetic field or an aura around it, including our bodies and the Earth's magnetosphere. The Fibonacci sequence and the golden ratio are found everywhere because everything is composed of frequency, and that's how frequency orders itself. Even our thoughts are composed of frequency, which represents information just as the Harmonic Series does. The universe is composed of consciousness, or another way to think about it is, the universe is conscious. Truly understanding the Harmonic Series is like having a skeleton key to the universe. So I'll end by giving you a few examples of tangible concepts out of the pretty much everywhere this process and its byproducts can be found and or applied to. Take the fact that flowers often have a Fibonacci number of petals as well as the golden ratio found between their leaves as they order themselves around the stem of the plant. This least dissonant perfect fifth interval apart from each other provides for optimal spacing for sunlight, literally the least amount of dissonance between each leaf as they strive to survive. Or when Fibonacci numbers add together to create the whole, such as a pine cone, the face of a sunflower, or the rose on this pineapple, which could be thought of as the major scale and the pentatonic scale added together to create the whole chromatic scale. The golden ratio is also found between our bones and other places in and on our bodies, such as the way our DNA orders itself, or even the fact that it uses frequency to communicate. Our DNA sings us into existence and can even be repaired with 528 Hz. There's also plenty of medical benefits, such as killing cancer, improving Parkinson's, ultrasounds, MRIs, and probably many more things to come as well. Then there's Zipf's Law, another universally present phenomenon that's a pattern of distribution found all over the place in seemingly unrelated things. For instance, if you were to take a book and find the most used word and then the second most used word, the second most used word will occur half as much as the first word. The third, a third, the fourth, a fourth. It doesn't matter which book or even which language. Heck, the language could even be made up. This strange yet consistent pattern of distribution is also found in population sizes, how often ingredients in cookbooks get used, how often a last name occurs, the size of moon craters, the amount of traffic a website gets, and the list goes on. And like the Fibonacci sequence in the golden ratio, the origin of Zipf's Law has yet to been explained. But need I point out that this pattern in the frequency of distribution plays out in the exact same manner as the ways the Harmonic Series unfolds? I mean, what else could be the common thread? Not that this is an open and shut case, but to help the cause, Zipf attributed his law to being the result of things taking the easiest possible route, or the path of least resistance, which, for those of you who aren't following, the Harmonic Series, which this definitely resembles, orders everything towards the least dissonant interval into a circle of fifths, or another way to put it, the least resistant interval. Zipf's hunch was probably right. Zipf's law is also closely related to the 80-20 principle, which would also make sense that the path of least resistance would also be the law of efficiency in business. The Harmonic Series is also probably responsible for this fork-in-the-road split of the whole that's always found in nature too. You see, in order for the branch to get water, it has to come up through the trunk as it splits into fractions of its former self until it reaches that branch. During my process of discovery, I predicted that the periodic table could and should be organized by either frequency, color, or shapes, despite having virtually no recollection of my high school chemistry class. Turns out all three were right, and luckily Walter Russell already did the work for me. As far as technology goes, well, besides the stuff I mentioned in the beginning, the possibilities are probably endless. Some of the things, such as free, inexhaustible wireless energy, were already tried to be given to us from such minds as Nikola Tesla and Victor Schoenberger, but there are still those who are discovering new things, such as sonoluminescence.
The star in a jar, a tiny spot of bright light contained in a flask of liquid. This star in a jar is made when a sound wave is passed through a small bubble inside a flask of liquid. And this sound wave makes the bubble do something remarkable. First it expands, then it collapses. And this collapse happens so violently that vapor molecules trapped inside the bubble slam together and heat up so much that the bubble gives off an incredible burst of heat and light, several thousand times a second, giving the appearance of a star. What made the phenomenon so exciting was the temperature of this star in a jar. On its surface alone, the light burns at tens of thousands of degrees.
In the sun, the interior can be millions of degrees, hot enough to cause fusion. And the thought crossed my mind that perhaps inside the collapsing bubble, the interior of the bubble might also get hot enough to cause fusion.
Now, Einstein once said that in order for something to exist, it has to be in motion. The Harmonic Series is why everything is in motion and all paths are curved, because in order for something to exist, it has to be a frequency, which ultimately defies the linear path it's a part of and moves towards the least dissonant perfect fifth ratio as it succumbs to entropy. Therefore, this implies that in order for something to exist, it has to be derived and split from the still whole, which in turn implies that this reality is not the end, that everything, including us, is continuously splitting from and returning to the source that's always present. Even Tesla once said, what is considered as empty space is just a manifestation of matter that is not awakened. This is starting to sound like a religion, but actually that's appropriate. This process is the basis of most organized religion, and it's the whole reason why there's balance in the world, including justice. You can't have a perfect fifth without simultaneously defining a perfect fourth, or as Newton would say, to every action there is an equal and opposite reaction. To Eastern philosophies, it boils down to karma. To the West, it's essentially do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Balance is everything. Restoring it is how we heal physically, mentally, and emotionally. Socially, it's the basis of our morals that are key to a free and democratic society. With a description of this one process, you can understand how to logically tackle everything from how government and businesses can run more efficiently, to how an individual can find happiness, their morals, and how they should interact with others. It describes not only how to understand how atoms work for all this to even work in the first place, but also the things atoms make up, like plants, which then go on to feed our biochemistry. Things like how our DNA is made and even how it made us, but also our heart's rhythm, which creates our magnetic field, and brainwave frequencies creating thoughts at different wavelengths, like different radio stations, all offering something new to listen to. Oh, and radio, cell phones, and other technology that helps this modern machine grow. Art, music, dance, anything cycle-based, such as time, tides, seasons, migration, and life on the whole. Honestly, it's hard not to find something that this doesn't apply to. Anyways, I could go on, but that's the gist of it. Maybe I'm right, maybe I'm wrong. That's not the point. Just let me know what you think below if you feel so inclined, and thanks for watching.